music on what do you call it? Just the randomizer, and you watch it carefully so it doesn't go to a commercial and ruin your commercial freeness. Um, Thank you, Druid. So I noticed Robin is at a 25-month streak. That is amazing. Druid is too, even though hers won't show up that way. But you guys, what you know what that means? That means I've been doing this for 25 months. I mean, human beings that are 25 months old can walk and talk. So what does that mean about this stream? So I hope you guys had a fantastic weekend. Mine was pretty good. Um, right, Druid? Ah! Um, so I did a whole bunch of random stuff this weekend. It's like I have these well laid plans, and then I mean you guys know how this goes. It's like, all right, I'm gonna clean out this bookshelf. I'm gonna reorganize this drawer, this cabinet, and then you're like, oh, look at this thing. Oh, I forgot I had this book. And then like you look up at the clock, and the next thing you know, like 6 hours has gone by, and you got nothing done. So yeah, you did. I started this show. Um, but if you were with me and Jill on Saturday, we did a very short stitch and glitch, and it really ended up being kind of, we sort of pre-planned that I would sort of pester Jill to talk about pricing. Because we knew it was going to be a short one, so we didn't really try not to digress too much. So it was an interesting one if you're interested in how, an antique dealer, and Jill specializing in quilts and needlework tools, how she does what she does and how she researches and all that stuff is very interesting, because it's just not as simple as doing things the way you might do in a retail store. If you open a retail business, I mean, like I have my little shop and I have supplies in there. It's mostly supplies. It's like my overage supplies when I buy on wholesale, for my own work, and I sell the extras. And I mean, that's a pretty easy, situation that, if I buy something for $1, then I'm going to try to sell it for $2 to make my money back and make a profit. But yeah, it just does not work that way when you're talking about, antiques and collectibles and things like that. So yeah, I agree, Robin. As much as Jill and I talk about her business, and I have been on buying trips with her, I don't know that I necessarily had like a really, good understanding of how she comes about her decisions, with what she prices things. So it was very interesting. So I did I think I showed my little fox off on Saturday, but I did finish him. He's got his little button up coat. I mean, look at these teeny buttons. I had to dig deep into my sewing stuff. I've been collecting, little things for so long. Uh-oh. No advertisements, please. Thank you for joining us, but your first time chat is not appreciated. And look at the back of him. His little pants, they button around his tail. And I had to put this itty bitty little snap in here. I mean, look at this, you guys. This is the tiniest little snap. I bought these little snaps. Oh gosh. It's probably been maybe 4 or 5 years ago. It was probably pre-pandemic. I had been working on a little doll project, and Etsy has fantastic source is a great source for little doll things, and a lot of little tiny things. A lot of the manufacturers or sellers are overseas, so I know that can be a little bit. Thanks, Druid. That can be a little bit difficult right now because of tariffs and stuff. But, if it's something that, you want to get into making teeny things, that there are sources for this stuff. And I know Amazon has a lot of things, but anyway, I have sort of a long time collection of itty bitty stuff. So It's fun. But I'm working on another little character, and I think I mentioned before, this is a Cynthia Train pattern. And if I have Wind of the Willows. I know I showed you guys Wind in the Willows the other day. It's her more recent book. This was a pattern that she released in 2012, I think. And then her book was released in 2022. And it's interesting. I think I mentioned this, how you could see her evolution through making these little dolls. That they were, I mean, very cute. But getting into the more modern ones, she's got techniques where she uses to paint their faces and stuff. And very interesting. It's an interesting technique at how she paints the felt, because you don't just like take acrylic paint and start painting felt, because like any fiber, it's going to absorb the paint. So she's got a special technique, and it's a very simple one. It uses hairspray. I won't give away all of the details, but so go buy the book. But yeah, it's good stuff. Good stuff. So yeah, I worked on some just general things this weekend. I've been working on a tiny little project that, I don't know. I sit here and think like, yeah, I should be doing more productive things, but this tiny little project brings me such joy and delight. And, times are kind of tough right now. Things are a little crazy. And, when times are tough, we tend to direct our attention to, little moments of joy, if that makes sense. And, I just think miniatures are like, they're not terribly expensive to make because they use such tiny little bits of things. And there are so many fun YouTube channels out there. And I would imagine also TikTok, although I'm not a TikTok person. But definitely miniatures have taken over Instagram, TikTok. I follow a whole bunch of Instagram accounts that are just, to die for cuteness. There's one called Grandma Gets Real, and she is a retired woman. She's a grandma. I think one of her kids just had a baby. I'm not sure if it was her daughter or son, what the relation is, but she's got a new grandchild, and she's into Barbies. And I don't think any of her stuff she makes herself. I think it's all purchased, but just the things she finds, and she gives tips on, you want to make this amazing little diorama, this is where I find all of my cute stuff. And one of the things I had never thought about was, anybody out there ever did scrapbooking? You probably remember the Jolie's stickers. I don't know if that company is still in business or they still make that stuff, because I don't shop Michael's very often. Or Hobby Lobby, any of those. If I need a thing, I run in and out, because going to the craft store is it's a pocketbook punch if you like to have craft and art supplies. But anyway, those Jolie's stickers, many of them were 3-dimensional little things, and she showed off a whole bunch of them this weekend. Or maybe it was Friday, anyway, on her Instagram channel, and I was like, oh my gosh, I remember seeing that stuff. And I've never been a scrapbooker, so I don't have any of those things, but I just kept thinking, oh my gosh, I bet I know some scrapbookers that have that kind of stuff, like little tiny board games and things like that. So yeah, there's just, miniatures are having a moment. And I kind of like to toot my own horn and say, like, I've been into miniatures since I was a child. And I was thinking back, I'm going to be visiting my mom soon. And it wasn't the last time I was there, but I don't know, a few times ago, I go back home every few months. My mom still lives in the house I grew up in, and there is, under my childhood bed, she has not changed my bedroom much. She's used it as an office for a while, but otherwise it's still all the same furniture. And under the bed, she's got a bunch of my things packed. And so, like, my doll collection and, some books that I was like, don't ever get rid of these. And I know this one little case. And the case I know I got from my grandmother. And it's a little train, like a carry-on, like, train case. And it's got all of my dollhouse stuff in it. The dollhouse itself that I got when I was 8 was one of those like pressed board situations. The outside of it kind of had like I don't know, I don't think it was a decal. It was like painted on or something. And then it was just empty rooms, and you had to furnish them and put wallpaper and everything on them. I don't know that I ever got anything on the floors other than maybe some little scraps of fabric that made rugs. But anyway, the dollhouse got damaged in a flood. So all of the little things were in a box. And I was, in my mind, I'm going through like trying to remember what all I have in there. I know that there's like a rocking chair pin cushion that I don't know, probably bought at some kind of craft bazaar. And I know that there's one piece of furniture in there, and I can't remember if it's a chair or a couch. I think it's a chair, like a wingback chair that I saved up my money. And there was this little shop in this little town that my mom and I used to go to when I was small. We would go and kind of window shop and go get lunch, and just one of those really cute little artsy craftsy sort of little towns. And they had this one shop that had dollhouse things and little toys and stickers. Oh my God, it was like a mecca for 8 or 10-year-old me. I would go there and I'd save up my money, and my mom would give me a little bit of money so I could get stickers and things, and then my own money saved up from birthdays and allowance and stuff. I would buy the dollhouse things, and the one thing I bought was, and they're fairly expensive now. You can find them. They're these kits. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but it came with all the stuff, and you glued it together. You were supposed to paint and stain the legs. I don't think I ever did that. You had to provide your own glue, but it had all the bits and pieces in there to make this like colonial furniture. So that was my big source of pride. So I just kept thinking to myself, I need to bring that home with me next time I go back to my mom's, and compare the quality of things you can buy now in the store versus back then, as well as the quality of my own crafting. I do know that there was a number of things in there where I would find some little doodad and be like, oh, this will be so good for my dollhouse. And I had somebody in my family circle, I guess, that made me one of those little cafe chairs out of a champagne cage, that little cage thing that's over a champagne cork. I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about. It's kind of got like a little medallion that I think maybe says the brand, and then it's got like wire that kind of goes down and wraps around. So when you undo the wire and then pop the cork, you can take like a little pair of pliers and open up the wire and kind of reconfigure it into like a little cafe chair. So I know I have one of those socked away somewhere. Anyway, it was a miniatures weekend, I guess, and I need to get back to some exhibit work. I was looking at my list of exhibits that I'm supposed to be getting work together for, and photographs and artist statements and all that jazz, and I'm like, I'm behind because I've been playing with toys. But that is one of the things, like when things are rough out in the world, and maybe the economy's bad and all those things, and people are a little I think it bears out historically, at least in the 20th century, that when things are like that, people sort of treat themselves, but they treat themselves in this small way, because they're kind of holding on to their savings, and they're not going out making big purchases, but they'll and sort of splurge on little things. As an example, I want to say it was during the Depression and the war years. People would buy like lipstick and nail polish. Like those things for women were very, very common, and sort of had an explosion at those times, cosmetics and things, because they were a cheaper purchase, but they were still a splurge. And the same thing with crafting, purchasing small amounts of something to make, an artistic or, a creative effort. Also, I think have like kind of go up when times are tough. I mean, COVID's a perfect example. Lots of people crafted during COVID. And of course the conditions were just right. You're stuck at home, like, tired of watching TV, go make some crafts. But I still think it was not just, I don't have anything better to do, but I'm kind of stressed out and I would like to funnel my efforts into this thing that again isn't like some major expenditure, but is sort of like a little splurge to just bring some joy into life. So that's where I'm looking at with my miniature obsession. All right, so what we shall be looking at today, I decided we haven't looked at a Quilter's newsletter magazine in forever. And so I dipped into my pile. I literally shut my eyes and just reached into the magazine file and grabbed one. I'll be honest, the first one I grabbed was from the late 90s, and I was like, I don't feel like looking at 90s right now. So my second dip, I got us April of 77. So that is what we're going to look at. I'm probably going to do a little bit more reading out of it than necessarily looking, because it's, these early ones did not have like a whole lot of pictures. There's a lot of like black and white and writing in here. There's not like major spreads in color. But there's a few in here with some cool pictures. But I will apologize right from the start here, because I was trying to not get the glare of the magazine, and I overcompensated by like shielding it with my body. So everything's got a giant human body shaped shadow on it. So my bad, I'm sorry, but I think you'll survive. So why don't we just go ahead and look at this? What was going on in 77? Oh, all right, bear with me a sec. My other screen is being a jerk. All right, there we go. Okay, so as you can see, my shadow. I'm sorry. But yeah, look at this fun pattern on our quilt on the front. At first glance, I was like, oh, a partridge in a pear tree, but no, it's all kinds of birds. You've got like, I guess it's a robin, a blue jay, a cardinal. I can't remember what this thing is. Some sort of little wren or something, an oriole. I'm not sure, a quail. This might be some sort of pheasant or something down here. And then it looks like there's another blue jay, a couple of robins. So I'm guessing in some cases we've got the male and the female birds in here. But anyway, that was a really, really kind of cool thing. So let me see if I can find. They always have the info about the quilt on the cover tucked in here somewhere. I am not seeing it here. Well, gosh darn it. Coming in the next issue. I don't see it in here. They usually do a better job than that of telling us what's on the front cover. It's usually right inside. Well, hopefully we'll run across it. Okay. So, and this is issue 90, by the way. Because remember, Quilter's Newsletter Magazine, 6 issues a year, or I'm sorry, 12 issues a year, or 10 issues a year, I think. Because I think they would do like a double month issue, I think maybe during the holidays sometimes. I can't remember. I know that there were like double month issues at times. So 10 to 12 issues a year. And they started in, was it 68, I think? So, yeah, we're already at issue 90 in 1977. So I'll read The Needle's Eye, Bonnie Lehman's little info here, because I always think this is interesting. This kind of gives you a look at the moment. And by the way, if you're new to Quilter's Newsletter Magazine, this was a magazine that was published from the late 60s through the 2000s. And the rights to it are currently owned by a company in Colorado, I think. It's Golden Media. And they own several other magazines. And I've kind of always wondered what they're going to do with their rights here. And I had this little fantasy at one point. I was like, maybe a bunch of us could get together. We could do like a Kickstarter or a GoFundMe kind of thing, and we could buy the rights to the magazine and do what we want with it. I still haven't given up on that idea, but anyway. So Bonnie Lehman was a woman. She and her husband, they had a quilt supply business as well as the magazine. And, this magazine was like the place to be in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So I think after the Lehmans gave up, sold the rights, and I know Bonnie Lehman is deceased. I'm 99% sure her husband also is. I think he probably predeceased her. But, this was an important magazine. And when the rights went to someone else, I think is when it went. The Lehmans did a great job. It's those other magazine companies and those Wall Street guys that ruin everything. Moving right along. Okay, so The Needle's Eye is Bonnie Lehman's little letter, editor's letter at the beginning. And she says, "Dear friends, here's news of a quilt exhibit that came in too late for any other spot in the magazine. The Quilters of America Unlimited annual exhibit," and so that's Quilters Unlimited, if you guys are familiar with that. I guess they used to be called Quilters of America Unlimited, and now they're Quilters Unlimited. Annual exhibit will again be held at the Athenaeum in Old Town. She gives it address in Alexandria, Virginia. This was very close to my grandmother's house. So I don't know. I have to ask my mom if this was something she knew about and did she visit it. Theo Essen's Grandma's Corner has lots of fans, and sometimes they write to ask if the characters she writes about are real people. The answer is yes, they are, but she often doesn't use their real names, as in the case with this month's Miss Pierce. So we're going to have to read that one. I like Theo Essen too. We have had an unexpectedly large volume of mail in response to the comments in my January letter about machine quilting. Oh, you guys know the quilt police didn't like machine quilting at this time. My mother was often told, if you do any machine quilting, you're not a real quilter, because real quilts are made by hand. And today we think about that and just go whatever. It seems that lots of readers have been doing machine piecing and want to share their techniques, and many more of them are very interested in learning how to do it easier and better. Next month's issue will bring you articles and comments from several quilting teachers about their methods for machine work, which I believe you will find very helpful. And we will have photos to show you of the beautiful machine patchwork done by Glendora Hudson and others. One aspect of machine piecing that hadn't even occurred to me when I wrote you in January was its importance to the needleworker who wants to earn money with quilts and patchwork. People who expect to earn a reasonable hourly wage with sewing must have efficient methods of doing it. And this is interesting. I was reading the Freedom Quilting Bee book a while back, and that's really one thing that they focused on a lot was working with the Gee's Bend quilters, and particularly the newer quilters are the people that didn't have as much experience sewing. They didn't come from generations of quilters, which I think was probably few and far between. I think a lot of the women in that area did come from generations of quilters, but they were often looking at these women's techniques and how their work process, and often trying to give them suggestions and teaching them new methods so that they could make things quicker. Because when Macy's wants to order, or I'm trying to think who was in New York, Bloomingdale's, when they want to order 100 or 500 of an item, you can't take forever to make that stuff. They want it for that season, and if you can't get it to them in time, then never mind. So definitely this idea of earning money, whether you're sewing towards a craft show or towards a higher end order, you have to speed it up. And I think that's where, in a lot of cases, machine quilting makes the most sense, or machine piecing, during this time period. And I mean, even into the early 20th century, and late 19th century, we know of quilters that were using machines. I mean, I have the evidence in my collection. So whether it was piecing or quilting, lots of people were doing it. So I don't know what the heck the quilt police of the 70s and 80s were thinking. Obviously not looking at old quilts. All right. Thinking of the reader who would welcome some ideas for earning extra money, And nowadays, that seems to include almost everyone. Yeah, 1977. Got some, I don't know, 77. Were we still in a gas crisis in 77? I'm not 100% sure. I was obviously a small child then. I know the gas crisis was a major issue when I was born, so 73. I think that was the time period when, you got gas based on your license plate number. I think it was odds were one set of days and evens were another set of days. And there would be lines of people. Yeah, okay, so Robin says we were. And I mean, come on, Robin, you weren't that old either. Were you driving in the 70s? I think, Robin, you were in high school in the 70s. I don't want to out your age. I'm sorry. So, anyway. Yeah. Okay. See. We are working on some patterns and design ideas for saleable quilts that can be completed in a few days instead of a few weeks. One of these is the crisscross patchwork on page 14, which we will look at. Others will be in upcoming issues. And don't forget the 9-hour 9 patch in the January issue. So yeah, we're already getting into these like fast methods. Eleanor Burns, I think, kind of arrives on the scene, and maybe she was creating things earlier than this, or maybe it was a little bit later, but I know Eleanor Burns was big in the 80s. She, she was known for quilt in a day, and I helped my mom make a quilt in a day, which I have. It went to my grandparents. It was a gift for them, and it was a log cabin, and I helped her tie it. She decided it was a Christmas gift. She didn't have time to quilt it, so I helped her tie it, and my grandparents used it quite a long time. I was looking at some of the quilts that came from my grandparents' house, and I need to ask my mom and get them labeled, because I know I'm not 100% sure if my mom made it or if she helped quilt it. So, and I mean, not to digress into millions of topics while I'm reading this, but label your quilts. Druid, I know that you've come across a bunch of quilts recently as you've been at your mom's house. Label those quilts. If you know who made them, please label them. Because, when you're gone, you want people to be able to look at those quilts and know that they had a history. And, I mean, God forbid, stuff goes to Goodwill or someplace like that. At least there's that history attached to it. And my hope is for all quilts to go to somebody that loves them and will use them, and not to, a heap, or worst case, a landfill. Anybody who puts a quilt in the landfill really has a special place in hell. That's all. That's all I've got to say. So, yeah, Druid, I think you mentioned that maybe some of them you knew were made by your grandmother or great-grandmother. And I know your aunt lives nearby, so I'm hoping maybe you could find out that way. So, okay. So the gas crisis. Here's some history for those of us that are younger than me. The 1973 embargo by OPEC in response to U.S. support for Israel during the Yom Kippur War quadrupled oil prices and caused long lines at gas stations. A second crisis in 79 was caused by instability during the Iranian Revolution, again leading to shortages, price hikes, and conservation measures like the 55-mile-an-hour national speed limit. I didn't know that. Oh my gosh, guys, like that's an interesting one. Okay, I always thought 55 miles was a safety thing. I had no idea that it had anything to do with conserving gas, but it makes sense. I mean, the faster you drive, the more gas, in theory, I guess, a car that uses gas would, and I'm assuming electric cars, probably the faster you drive, right? I don't know anything about these things. All right, let's finish Bonnie's letter. While we're on the subject of making money with quilts, let me call your attention to the book reviewed on page 28, which tells you how to do it. I think twice anymore about calling a quilt design original, because it has often happened that a design I thought I had created turns up later in an old quilt book, or one of you sends me your design which looks just like it. I frequently get similar contributions from readers also, each of whom created her own design independently. So herein we have, you know, we have proof that people are absolutely capable of coming up with similar ideas, completely separated from each other. Nowadays, it's harder, I think, to parse those things out because with social media and the internet, you never know when something you think that you have come up with independently may have been influenced by something, you know? But I mean, back then, unless you saw something in a book and just forgot about it, it's a little bit less probable that you were influenced by something without realizing it. Anyway, so I won't go out on a limb and claim that Mr. Callan's design on page 25 is a brand new concept in quilt making, but Mr. Callan has never seen a pattern like it, and neither have I. So I am hopeful that we do have something really new for you to try in this issue, pyramid patchwork. So I'll make sure we stop on that one. And it's this Mr. Callan. I'd never heard of him, but he was also close by to where I grew up. And then she has a couple of retractions, mistakes that she had to fix. And then, you know, she always signs off and say, "Happy quilting, Bonnie Lehman." So very cute. All right, metal templates. You guys ever run across any of those, or did you have any? I know my mom had some, and sometimes they were made out of like tin. And I know some of the ones she had had a sandpaper on the back of them to, you know, so they didn't move around. But my gosh, from metal templates to the things we have now, you know, like in 40 years, 50 years time. Yeah, it's crazy. You know, I mean, this time period, although machine piecing and quilting are becoming much more ubiquitous, we're still relying on, in 1977, still relying on very traditional methods of quilting. You know, besides a sewing machine, there's not, you know, rotary cutters have not arrived on the scene yet. That's not until a couple more years. I think it's, oh gosh, my AQSG colleague Kristen Barris did a piece about it. She did a paper about it. It was very, very interesting because she got into the history and, you know, how the rotary cutter came about, and about the Olfa company and, you know, all that stuff in Japan. But still, that stuff hasn't arrived on the scene yet. That's like 1980 something, 83 maybe. So yeah, everything is still very, very traditional. I thought this was fun. Look at this. You get a teddy bear pattern, a a tennis racket cover, and then this strange looking tote bag. All three for only $1. Also, look at this, Lincoln, Nebraska. I don't have an IQM yet, but Lincoln is still a destination. And it mentions the quilt authorities that will be included. So Jean Dupois, who is a name I know, but I'm not really super familiar with her work. Michael James, Jean Ray Laurie, Marcia Spark, who is another person I don't actually recognize her name, and Helen Squire. I do recognize her name, but I'm not really familiar with her work either. But still, big names. Lincoln is, stuff's been happening in Nebraska for a long time. We also have some New England, Silver Spring, Maryland. You know, I think I'm kind of lucky in where I grew up and where I live now. We have a lot of quilty stuff going on around us, and historic stuff. So Quilters Unlimited is from this area. You know, we have, of course, the Smithsonian American History Museum has lots of textiles. The DAR has great stuff. There's big quilt things that just happen throughout Virginia, in Maryland. So I've always felt kind of privileged to have been in, you know, grown up in this area, that even when I didn't appreciate quilts, they're always around. So this, not a whole lot interesting to look on this beach, but look at the sunbonnets, sunbonnet baby, pillow pattern, and overall boy. You know, and just looking at these, I mean, this one, overall boy, is actually a complete ripoff of a Fisherman Fred pattern from, I think it was from the 40s or 30s. This sunbonnet Sue is a little bit more, she's a little bit more unique looking, I think. All right. What's new? News in quilting. So a lot of stuff going on in Massachusetts at this time. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I see Michael James's name. He is going gangbusters at this time period. He's very popular. I see Jean Ray Laurie, Virginia Avery. Beth and Jeffrey Gutchin. I want to say they were Amish quilters or Amish quilt people. I think. Stuff going on in Kansas, Ohio, Richmond, Virginia. That's where I went to school. National Textile Resource Center. 1977 Assembly for Embroiderers, sponsored by the Valentine Museum, held in Richmond in April of 77. So the Valentine is a fantastic museum. If you ever visit Richmond, or if you are close enough to go there, visit. The Valentine is a fantastic museum. They have, I'm embarrassed to say I haven't been there in decades. It was a important place when I was in college, but I haven't been there in a very long time. But this assembly, so this is 77. This assembly featured 28 full workshops and 5 mini workshops offering needlework techniques of all types, needlework design, and textile conservation. This is awesome. A shop owners forum for retailers and manufacturers will begin several days in advance, and an ongoing program of teacher certification will culminate in orals, proving the candidate's teaching ability. I'm not exactly sure what that means. I guess maybe they make a presentation. In addition to the workshops, activities will include a banquet, needlework exhibits, an optional tour to Williamsburg. Williamsburg's about an hour away from Richmond. And an evening in the Wickham Valentine House, which is the historic house where the Valentine Museum resides. Fascinating. Also, I thought this one was cute. Paoli, Pennsylvania, which I have never heard of. It must be upper or western part of the state because it's not familiar to me. 28 boys from grades 7 through 12 in the Church Farm School, inspired and instructed by Quilter's newsletter reader, Mrs. Joseph Ryle, recently completed a quilt in embroidery and applique. Their quilt turned out so successfully that headmaster Charles W. Schreiner Jr. had a glass and mahogany case made for it and installed it permanently in the school library as an official dedication at a school assembly. That's amazing. This is terrible to say. Usually children's quilts are very the craftsmanship they're very naive. The craftsmanship is generally a little so for something like this to be so considered so important by this school, and this is obviously a private school, that a glass and mahogany case is not a cheap thing to have made, and I'm thinking glass, is it like the whole front of the thing is glassed, to be able to see the quilt? That's certainly not an inexpensive undertaking or an easy undertaking. So that's very interesting. I would like to look up this school at some point and see. I'm wondering, do they still have the quilt? Is it still being displayed? Very interesting stuff. Okay. The ads are always so interesting. So Quilt Country, St. Joseph, Missouri. And I thought this was interesting. Look. Quilt Country buys quilts. Quilt Country wants to see your homemade quilts. We have markets for hand-quilted or machine-quilted articles. Our buyers must search constantly to meet the demand. Collectors from all parts of the United States and Canada contact us regularly and frequently, and our stock turns over nearly every month. Quilt Country buys quilts, quilt tops, and quilt blocks. It's not uncommon for collectors to visit Quilt Country stores desiring quilts, quilt tops, or quilt blocks in any condition, any age. New or old, damaged, soiled, or in mint condition. We may have buyers who are interested. And then there's a note. Quilts not purchased will be returned at your expense.
It's easy to sell quilts to Quilt Country. Please remember to attach a slip of paper to your quilts, quilt tops, or quilt blocks with your name and asking price. Then carefully wrap and package your items and send them to Quilt Country by insured mail or carrier. That's all there is to it. We'll be watching for your package to arrive soon. Can you imagine? In this day and age, like, nobody would do that. Send your stuff off just to this retailer. And I'm sure these people are very reputable. I mean, I don't know anything about them, but they must have been reputable and successful. Here's a testimonial. We absolutely and unconditionally stand behind every product and service we sell. It's as simple as that. This letter is an example of many we have on file. Dear Quilt Country, I want to thank you for selecting and sending me the most beautiful quilt I have ever seen. It is exactly what I wanted, and it is gorgeous in our bedroom. It is something that I will treasure for years to come. You were so kind to allow me to exchange the first quilt for this one. So this is interesting. I'm wondering, how are people like mail ordering these quilts? Because it sounds like this person, LF from California, that person did not travel, it sounds like, to Kansas City, Missouri and like look at quilts. They were sent a quilt and they were like, nah, this isn't the one. And so they were sent another quilt. And I mean, this is, I'm blanking right now what that is. It, when you're sent something kind of like on a trial basis, and then if you like it, you pay for it. So, I can't remember what that's called. Yeah, that's what they were doing. I mean, you can imagine something like that happening today because, I mean, the vast number of scammers out there who would be like, yeah, I'm going to take this quilt on a trial basis, wink, wink, and you'll never hear from me again. There are even scammers in the quilt world, sadly enough. So yeah, this is just so interesting that this was something in 77 that we would not see today. But also just, this concept of even the people in good faith doing this. I don't know too many people who would buy a quilt sight unseen. But again, it sounds like, you can exchange it till you get what you want. But like, my gosh, what a hassle. I mean, I could see today, like you have like a good picture, we see a good picture online, and think about the auction sites that we've looked at. Jill and I look at auction sites all the time. And so, those auction sites, especially our friend Dana, she gets really good pictures, and so she'll show where all the damage is and if there's any signatures or anything special, and so you get a really good idea looking at those pictures. But to not have that and just to be like, we're going to send you this green and white quilt and it has some dates on it and it's in okay condition. I mean, you don't know what you're getting. It's wild. Stuff like that just doesn't happen these days. Okay, so here, this is fun. Modern quilting. So very modern, right? This one's called Winner's Circle, and let me read you the little blurb here. And you can see, I'll scroll in and zoom in a second. So it says, this pattern is a good one for quilters at the intermediate stage, those who are no longer beginners but who are not quite ready for the most intricate patterns. The long, easy curves of this pattern provide a practical transition from straight seams to circular seams. Notches have been drawn in this pattern to help you. Make your pattern templates in the usual way. See page 2. So what does page 2 say? Did I miss this? Oh, yes, here's the little blurb that's on page 2. How to use the Patterns and Quilters newsletter. Piecing quilt patches together by hand can be done more accurately if the seam line is marked around a template. For this reason, Quilters newsletter patterns do not, as a rule, include seams. Make templates by tracing the pattern pieces and transferring them to something stiff like cardboard or sandpaper, or cardboard with sandpaper glued on. Because that's what my mom used to do, I think, or somebody in her circle. Cut the pattern out. Draw around it with pencil on wrong side of fabric. This line will be the seam line. Cut outward from seam line 1/4 inch. Follow marked line when sewing. And to me, I do that. That's the easiest way to get if you're hand piecing to get your everything really accurate. In fact, I don't pay much attention to a 1/4 inch for hand piecing if I'm, doing templates versus just, rotary cutting squares. If you pay attention to the seam line, and then you can have, whatever kind of seam allowance you want. And that is a technique that I think a lot of hand piecers used, like back in the day. So that's one of the reasons why you'll see on antique quilts or old quilts that sometimes the seam allowance will be like microscopic, like not even there, and seams will pop open. And I think it's often like, oh, well, they were just being economical because they only had so much fabric. And I think that's certainly the case sometimes. But I think it's also just the fact that they were going on the seam line, not so much the seam allowance, and then they would just cut off the excess, and it's pretty easy to just whack off too much. So I suspect sometimes when we see those like ridiculous non-existent seam allowance, it's a combination of things. I think it's not always, poor pitiful me, I don't have enough fabric. But you can see what they're showing here. There's the 3 quilt pieces, or the 3 pattern pieces, A, B, and C, and then how these tabs line up as you're sewing. And certainly hand piecing curves is a lot easier than doing it by machine. Although there are a number of classes that I know I've taken at least one, but a number of teachers that teach curved piecing on the machine. And, there are some very simple techniques for doing this on the machine. It just kind of takes practice. All right, so this was an interesting article, and I apologize, my pictures are terrible, but so this was a trip to the San Blas Islands, which San Blas, I'm assuming I'm saying that right, which I'm not familiar. I wasn't familiar with these islands, but they are, I want to say it's off the coast of Panama. So I'm not going to read this whole article, but I'll read the beginning of it. So this is Donna Renshaw, and she and her husband, and there's a little, like, I guess kind of the way that she talks about, or that they talk about these people are a little outdated. Let's say, I wouldn't call it racist, but it's a little outdated. So FYI, different time. So it says Donna has been doing and teaching quilt making for a number of years. She wrote the book Quilting, A Revived Art, and was special consultant and writer working with Allison Smith Gonsalves on Sunset's book Quilting and Patchwork in '73. Until recently, Donna owned a shop that she called the Quilting Bee in Los Altos, California. And she says, since the first time I ever heard the word mola, I have been intrigued by the fascinating reverse applique procedure in which molas are made. During the time I had my quilt shop in Los Altos, several ladies came in with molas their husbands had brought from the San Blas Islands, and my desire to learn more about this kind of needlework grew. After my shop was sold, my house in order, and my feet began to get itchy to go somewhere and do something, I decided it was time to satisfy my curiosity about molas. I said to my husband, also retired, let's go to Panama and find the San Blas Islands. At first, he was reluctant, thinking perhaps I had gone off the deep end at last in my enthusiasm for stitchery and needlework, and that maybe we really didn't need to go off to some uncharted islands to visit Kuna Indians who still wore rings in their noses. It's a time. It's a different time. I thought it was interesting, looking at these pictures of these ladies. I did not immediately identify them as, the indigenous Kuna people. As I was just flipping through, I saw the woman's wearing like a head covering, and I thought, oh, these were Indian women. And then I was like, no, wait a minute, these are molas. This has to be South America. So anyway, so he's reluctant. I finally won him over when I passed on the hearsay information that Panama City was the shopping crossroads of the world. And that we could buy anything we wanted there. I was wrong about this, incidentally, except for molas. The shopping there left much to be desired. So, and she goes on to talk about the trip. And apparently there are 365 islands along the coast of Panama.
I did not know this. So anyway, she goes out on here, and yeah, she talks about, like, I mean, they're buying all of this stuff, and it, not costing not very much money at all. And it talks about, the children there, and so on. And apparently, this is another thing I didn't know. She says one thing we quickly learned is that a mola is actually a certain type of blouse. So it's not actually the piece of needlework. It's a garment, a blouse with big sleeves, yoke front and back, and under each yoke is a reverse applique panel. So it's here, that can be removed. So if you buy a blouse, you get two molas, so to speak. So I guess one on the front and one on the back. Oh, hey, Anon Maker. So if you have a piece of that artwork hanging in your hallway, your dad got it in Panama in the 70s. It's a beautiful fish, and I took it with me when I moved to Atlanta. Mom one day asked about it, and I was like, I took that when I moved, and you haven't missed it. I have had that experience also in my home where my mother has visited, and I'm like, oh, I have one of those. And I'm like, yeah, that's yours. She's like, when did you take it? And I'm like, a decade ago? I actually have two very cool molas that I got at an estate sale, and the people I suspect were travelers. I suspect it just based on the things that I saw in the estate sale, and some of the items I got. Exactly, right? You did have one. Now it's mine. But they were, and I suspected just, based on the things they had, that they probably, like, in their retirement years had traveled. And the woman who I suspect was the last, she had moved to retirement, nursing home, or she was the last to die. Because there were some things that were fairly recent that she had, but she was clearly into textiles. So I was so excited at that auction. It was a state clear out directly from their house, and I was a little bittersweet, to go to those, to go to the house. It's, I don't know, it kind of breaks my heart a little bit, but I scooped up a bunch of needlework type stuff that had just been passed over. I got this gorgeous old, probably mid to late 18th or 19th century quilt for like $1 because they had photographed it so badly. They'd photographed it literally like in an unfolded heap. And so I was like, well, if it's crap, it's crap. I'll use it as like, a moving blanket. But it turned out that the side they didn't photograph was incredible and full of mid 19th century fabrics. I was like, you fools. Anyway, long story short to say, I have two very cool molas. One I actually have in my shop for sale because, I have all of these various textiles that I'll never do anything with them. And then the other one I have is actually a pair of scorpions that I have framed. It was already framed, and I have it hanging in the little area right heading into my kitchen. So it's really cool. Anyway, I should have grabbed that today. I didn't even think about that to show you guys. All right. So, I mean, she's talking about Peace Corps had been in the islands. Yeah. So the young children have no toys. Instead, they play with their brothers and sisters and shells, fish, pods, trees, and parrots. There's something to be said for children that can have fun in the outdoors, without toys. Yeah, I'm just looking here. I'm looking to see if there was anything really interesting. She says, black and red are predominant colors, as you can see here. I think I took a slightly better picture. But yeah, red, orange. I've noticed these are very predominant colors. Look at this. Look at this fish. This fish and its teeth. I love the sort of organic shapes, and they're very, they're very metaphorical. This is not what a fish looks like, but it's so cool how they've interpreted this. And those teeth just, I looked at this one a bunch today as I was taking pictures of, I just kept looking at this fish, and I'm like, oh my goodness, the teeth. I love it.
this one surprised me. I've never seen anything like this. Not that I have studied molas in any way, shape, or form. I've just, anytime I see one, I look at it and think, oh, amazing, beautiful. Reverse applique is quite a bit of work. Because the thing is, like, to get all of this, you have to, and you can work, and I have done a tiny bit of mola work. When I was in college, it was one of the, in textiles, one of the things that we were meant to try and do. And I think I literally made like a 3-inch thing. But you literally have to stack all of these fabrics up and cut and work through them. Now you could kind of slide, like you could maybe slide like a piece of white, just little scrap under there and work your way down. But for the most part, you're stacking all of these textiles and you're clipping through. And the applique, it's needle turn applique, but it's, it's being turned, to the inside versus coming from the outside the way like a traditional applique would happen. So it's really an amazing type of sewing. It's just a different process than like just regular traditional needle turn applique. Let's see, I think I took another picture of, this one I thought was really pretty. This is just kind of a abstract design. But I mean, you can see, so like around these curves of these sort of almond shaped shapes, it's like a little tiny jaggedy design, and it's because this dark red has been clipped and all those little edges folded under to make it's called a dog tooth edge. And there are quilts, antique American quilts that use this technique around the borders. So if you ever see a border on an antique quilt that it looks like it's triangles, but then when you look at it, they're not pieced, it's because they have used what this technique is, which is, imagine a strip of fabric, and in this case, it's a curved strip that has been cut down from like a stack of fabrics. And then you clip at a regular distance. So, every inch maybe, or every 2 inches, whatever. In this case, it's probably every like 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, whatever. And then you take, so you've got these like little fringes, and then you take and you fold the outer parts in to make a triangle, if that makes sense. It's called a dog tooth. And then you have to intricately stitch around each of those. And I realize this is pretty blurry, but this little bit right here, that inner part, you have to take like a little minuscule stitch there to make sure that it doesn't unravel, because it technically ends up being a little bit of a raw edge. So yeah, dogtooth stitching is really interesting, and I didn't know a whole lot about it until really starting to study antique quilts. And it was some of my wonderful friends and colleagues in the area, particularly a couple of friends up in Pennsylvania, that are like, yeah, this is how this is done. When you see this is what it is. And it occurred to me later on that any type of like this type of stitching, and there's other forms of stitching that'll use this too, but yeah, it just, this reverse applique, and then I mean, it's tiny, and I think about my own fat fingers and stitching little things like this. I mean, I'll tell you, to get the buttons on this little fox's coat, how many times I dropped these stinking itty bitty buttons because of my big fat fingers. So to have these little tiny intricate shapes, and you've got to use basically use the tip of your needle to sort of tease the fabric. It's amazing to me. It's such beautiful craftsmanship. Okay, so this is fun. This is telling you how to make your own mola. And the person who wrote this is not Donna, who wrote about the trip to the island, but another quilter. So I thought that was kind of interesting how, I'm thinking from the perspective of various magazines, and I think Piecework sometimes will do this, where you'll have one person writes an article that's, historic or cultural in they've researched, and then you'll get another person that then writes a pattern or, instructions. But often, you also see where the person that has the experience, of buying molas might also be the person that would write the article. So I thought this was interesting, and I kind of wonder how Bonnie Lehman maybe sourced, instructions and articles like Donna Renfrew's, did I say her name right? Yeah, I'm sorry, Donna Renshaw's article. Which came first? I'm assuming that she found this person, Kathy Smith, that submitted this later on after Donna's article, I guess. I don't know. It's, I've never been in publishing, and I've always often wondered how they manage the editorial schedule with things like this. So this just explains, the technique used in molas is reverse applique. Designs are made with several layers of fabric basted together. The upper layer is cut through to reveal the next layer. The second layer is cut to reveal the third layer, and so on. This is continued until all layers have been exposed. Instead of turning under the edges of a patchwork and sewing it onto a background, as in regular applique, the background shape is turned under and sewn to the design itself. Or sewn to the design motif. It may sound complicated, so if you haven't tried it before, we suggest your first mola to be a very simple design. And that's kind of what they show here. So starting off with these layers of fabric, you baste them together, and then you start cutting. And you're revealing, as you go down, you're revealing these different layers of fabric. Pretty cool. Yeah, it's amazing just looking at all of these lists of things that are going on all over the country at this time period. Aunt Martha's still around, Colonial Needle. All right, so I think the last thing I want to look at here before we switch over to our friend Mavis is Grandma's Corner by Theo Essen. I love to read her stories. So, and then I think we'll flip through the rest real quickly. So, Grandma's Corner, Payment in Like Coin by Theo Essen. The nearer I got to school that Friday morning, the more rebellious I became. I had never even thought of playing hooky, but suddenly I knew I was not going to school today. I simply could not face what had become a weekly bout with Miss Pierce, our stony-faced sewing teacher. So Bonnie Lehman mentioned Miss Pierce. So Miss Pierce is a pseudonym. It's not her real name. In Miss Pierce's class each week. Oh no, I'm sorry. Wait a minute. Home economics was a new course offered in the 6th grade that year. Cooking I loved, but sewing turned out to be something else, and I had thought that I really liked to sew. But in Miss Pierce's class each week I sewed, and each week Miss Pierce ripped my stitches out. We will do it right, or we will not do it at all, she was fond of saying. But there was no way we could not do it. She insisted it be done. Our current project was putting bias binding around the neck and armholes of a camisole top underskirt. Wow, that's actually quite a garment for a child. By now, the stitches in my skirt top had been ripped out so often that the raw edges were stretched almost to fringed scallops. I was so frustrated by last week's encounter that I had started to cry, an act that always made me furious, so I stormed out of the room without permission and got lectured severely by the principal. Today, I just decided to bypass the whole scene. I knew the frayed edges were beyond redemption. There was no way I could do an acceptable job, and Miss Pierce would continue to insist on perfection. Short of the school, I turned about and headed down a side road that led to Willow Creek. It was a beautiful spring day, too nice to be indoors anyway. But I had no idea how long a day of doing nothing could be. By mid-morning, I was completely bored with myself. I had finished tomorrow's math and English lesson and my lunch. I made a list of all the birds I recognized. I wish I had a book to read. By noon, I was suffering remorse and facing a real dilemma, not the least of which was telling Grandma what I had done. The more I thought about it, the less important it seemed to wait till school was out to go home. It was merely prolonging the agony. So think about this, 6th grade, so she's 11-ish. When I opened the kitchen door, Grandma was elbow deep in a batch of bread. She looked startled. "Dodie, what happened?" Why are you home so early? I didn't want to go to school today. You what? I'm sure I was the picture of guilt. Grandma's jawline tightened sharply, but she continued to knead the bread. Then she cut off chunks of dough, which she spanked with lard before she tucked them into loaf pans. With great deliberation, she washed her hands and arms at the sink, dried them, and then turned to me. Well, young lady, I think we had better talk. Reluctantly, I told Grandma the whole unhappy story. I'm surprised, Dodie. I always thought you sewed rather well. I'll admit bias binding can be difficult. It demands much more patience. It demands as much patience as skill, though. Grandma knows that flaw in my character well. I don't think even you could make that awful mess acceptable to Miss Pierce now, I stormed. Suddenly, Grandma was muttering to herself. Pierce, Dodie. Is her name Betsy Pierce by any chance? I see what's coming. Yes, Grandma, why? Never mind that just now. I think I will visit your sewing class next week. I used to know a Bessie Pierce when I was young. It would be interesting to see if she is the same one. Next week, with Grandma at my side, the prospect of facing Miss Pierce didn't seem such an ordeal. Grandma and Miss Pierce greeted each other cordially and, as old-time friends, briefly discussed their early acquaintance and mutual friends. Grandma warmly invited her to call. Then suddenly she became businesslike. I understand Dodie is having trouble with her sewing. May I see the garment, please? Miss Pierce seemed a little flustered, and her cheeks turned very pink. Yes, of course. I've just been thinking that we might let Dodie pass this project and go on to our next phase. By now, Grandma had the offending underskirt in her hands. I saw her jawline tighten a little. No, indeed, Miss Pierce. Dodie will complete her project, but I think even you will agree that this top is beyond salvage. With your permission, I'd like to help her cut a new top for this skirt. With all the practice she has had on this one, I'm sure she will do a very good job on the new one. Suffice to say, I got a passing grade in sewing, and I had a good feeling that I really earned it. Still, I always wondered about that strange sense of unease that Miss Pierce always seemed to display in Grandma's presence. It was not until the end of the school year, and only after Miss Pierce let it be known that she would not be back in the fall, that Grandma told me about her. Even as a girl in our small town back east, Bessie Pierce was a very stiff and unbending young person. She seemed to yearn to be popular, but her air of superiority turned people away. I remember how she insisted on quilting at the top with the best quilters, instead of serving her apprenticeship on the less elaborate quilts. I remember, like it was yesterday, the last quilting bee Bessie came to. The quilt put in that day was a beautiful open pattern. The quilting motif was elaborate and an intricate part of the design. In our town, as in most towns I suppose, one woman, because of her skill and organizing ability, became the mistress of the quilting bees by silent mutual consent. Her word was practically law. Our leader was Mrs. Lane. That day, Bessie moved right in with the best quilters and quilted all morning, making a great display of her speed. When she took her place again after the lunch break, she found all of her quilting had been picked out by Mrs. Lane. She drew her quietly aside and said, Bessie, all of the quilting must be uniform. Do you want to try again? Poor Bessie. She turned white, then red, then white again. She stalked out of the house that day and never attended another quilting bee. Not in that town, at least. Perhaps this is why she derives so much pleasure out of belittling her pupils' efforts. Maybe it is her way of getting back at Mrs. Lane. Grandma finished her story and shook her head. I'm really glad that Grandma told me about Miss Bessie Pierce. Now when I think about her, it is with sorrow instead of anger. Oh. So, well, that was an interesting story, kind of, I guess it was sort of a story about empathy. You never know when somebody who's being a real turd maybe has a sad story. So this is a Spring Bouquet. I think this is just an embroidery design. Yeah, it's embroidery design. And so next we have a Wild Goose Chase, which is a, what do you call this? An equilateral triangle? No. Isosceles? Isosceles. Half square triangles. These are isosceles triangles. Crisscross patchwork. This one's interesting because this one is strip piecing, but strip piecing without a rotary cutter. So they're showing marking lines on your fabric with a pencil and then cutting them out with scissors. And this, I'm sure, was considered a little cutting edge. Like, hey, look at this. You can pin your fabric down, mark it with a pencil, cut it in strips, and then make this amazing quilt. So this was interesting. This was a color, like a color wheel piece, and see, continued from last month's article. So this is like an ongoing piece about color, but I thought these were really fun. This is a Nancy Crow quilt, and then this is talking about, like, you know, where the colors are on the color wheel. But I thought, as soon as I saw this, I knew it was Nancy Crow. And it's really bold, and I really like this one. I think this one's really pretty. And then here's two more. So this one, elaborate Tangram, is by Michael James. Oh, so this whole thing is Michael James. This article is Michael James. So this one's Michael James, and then this is also Michael James. Yeah, so at this point, I think Michael James was doing a lot of work with Quilter's Newsletter magazine, and he was just, this was like, I think, really major early fame for him with his work. Oh, I took some closer pictures. This one's pretty fun. Look, there's like this is like a bandana print there in the middle. Very, I mean, it's a really modern and interesting color scheme, but then it's got those fabrics, those 1970s fabrics, the little prints. This is another one of the Nancy Crow, a little bit better picture. I like the sort of black and white, or maybe it's black and gray, those big triangles coming in. That's a close up of the color wheel. This is cute. Spring is here, so you've got a little apron, and then this is the quilting pattern, or the piecing pattern. I guess it's applique. Yeah, it's applique. Quilter's Queries. I'll have to skip this time. Quilting Bee. These are the letters to the editor. I'm gonna skip through these. This was something that was interesting. I just saw as I was taking pictures. Hexagraph. So if you've ever wanted to plot out your own design for a grandmother's flower garden, or a mosaic, or hexagon flower basket, only to discover how hard it is to draw an accurate hexagon grid, this you can buy. It's basically graph paper, but it's ruled with hexagons so that you could color. So you could get 10 sheets or a pad of 100. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And then see-through graph paper. And I'm assuming it's like a tracing paper type product. Okay, the meeting place. So this is about Mr. Calland. And he was a producer for the NPR in North Arlington, which in Virginia. Fred Calland. As busy as his interesting career keeps him, he found time during 1976 to design and make 18 quilts with a bicentennial theme. 18 quilts! It's amazing. And then look at this design, and that's him. This one is so interesting. It's like a Mobius strip, each one of these, and then they turn. Really cool. And then here's 3 quilts down here, and this one is really interesting. This one's like almost like modern art, and what I think we're looking at is it's like a fence, and then it's like a house, and that's like the eaves of a I don't know, what do you call that, like in a Cape Cod, that's kind of got the window that pokes out, sort of that little in the attic, and it's like a flag there. I really like that. That's very modern art-ish. This one, he's achieved that ombre effect, and I can't get in here close enough in the pictures of this, and I think even looking at the magazine itself, it's really impossible to tell. I suspect that this is some type of fabric that's been dyed with that ombre effect, but I don't know. I mean, Nancy Crow achieves this type of effect with piecing, so I don't know if this is the fabric or the piecing. I suspect it's the fabric, though. And then this one is very kind of plain. So this one, let's see. He made this one after reading Frank Elgar's monograph on Piet Mondrian. So this is a very Mondrian, and you probably would recognize these sort of black lines. Mondrian worked in, like, it would be white, black, red, blue, and yellow. And you think about it, you probably recognize his artwork. I think Piet Mondrian was early 20th century, late 19th century. This one I think is really fun. So it's like all these shapes in here, and I don't know if they're hexagons. Like, again, it's really hard to tell in the magazine. But what I can say is these V shapes in here, that is, it appears to be some type of metallic fabric. So it says, yeah, so it's silver lame. Top is rather heavy. And I don't know what to do about quilting. So it looks like this is just a top. But very interesting. And then this is another like really modern art like piece. What does he say about this? See, he calls this Peaks Island Beauty. So utilizing repeated, rather because early patterns utilizing repeated elongated triangles seem to usually bear such names, such as New York Beauty. So, yeah, but this is, I mean, so you've got these like long pointy pieces, the long pointy triangles, which is very New York Beauty, or well, Mariner's Compass. They're like symmetrical. These are isosceles. But then you've got these curved pieces are Drunkard's Path blocks. So, but the way he's arranged them, I mean, that's why we love Drunkard's Path, Log Cabin, all of those types of patterns, because depending on how you utilize color and setting, you can make all kinds of different interesting patterns. That's why I really love these so much. So, all right, I'm going to leave off there so we can get to Mavis. There was only a couple more pages here, and they're not super interesting. I still don't see any place where it talks about the quilt that was on the cover. So if I find it, I will update. All right. So where we left off in Traditional Quilting by Mavis Fitzrandolph. Oh, this AI assisted garbage. I'm going to give you something good to look at while I read. So we've got some pretty, got some pretty Welsh quilting put up. All right. Okay. So where we left off, she was talking, so we're in chapter 2. And as a reminder, we are reading Traditional Quilting by Mavis Fitzrandolph, written in or published in 1954. And this is primarily, well, not primarily, this is entirely about quilting in Wales and England. And this chapter, she's been talking about the people, like, who are the people that quilt? Why are they quilting? And she's really focusing on people who quilt for money. So people who, primarily women, there's been a few men, but primarily women who are making quilts to sell. So they're professional quilters. And she first talked about the people that sort of live, they quilt from their homes. And now we're going to get into the itinerant quilter. Let me zoom in here better. Okay. So, Chapter 2, the itinerant quilter. The itinerant quilter, who went from farm to farm, staying at each for some weeks to renew the stock of quilts, was a familiar figure of the countryside in South Wales and Radnorshire about 50 years ago. So again, this is 1954, so 50 years prior would have been the turn of the century or the last decade of the 1800s. The farmer supplied all the materials, and sometimes there was a frame in the farmhouse, but more often the quilter brought her own. Wow. Okay, so you're traveling, and you've got your own quilt frame with you. Presumably, a farmer's wife was too busy herself to make the great number of quilts which would be needed for the farm hands as well as for the family. Two sisters at Guisborough in Yorkshire, about 1870 to 1880, used to go to the big houses and farms for several weeks at a time, dressmaking and quilting, being paid a few shillings weekly. In County Durham, Mrs. Lough recalled that her great-aunt stayed with them for a month each year and quilted for her keep, but this was a family arrangement. Of course, Auntie, you can come and quilt as long as you want, but we need those quilts. if you want a place to stay and the food to eat. I could find no other memory of itinerant quilters in the north, but since dressmaking was often combined with quilting in Wales, it is likely that the North Country dressmaker, who periodically went to work in the big houses for a week or so, also made a few quilts. The North Country farmhouse seems to have used just as many quilts as the Welsh one. Was the Welshwoman's time more occupied with farm work, or did she have fewer skilled needlewomen, relatives, and hired help in the house, that she had to depend on the itinerant quilter to maintain the stock of quilts, which her North Country counterpart seems to have produced unaided, together with innumerable rag rugs? If I rightly remember, she did not have a home. It was going about like that I was told, of one Welsh itinerant quilter. Oh boy. I cannot even begin to know how to pronounce some of this. So they called her, I'm just going to spell it because I know that Welsh words are not, that Celtic, it's not pronounced the way it looks. So they called her Gwittreg. So I'm assuming that means something quilt, like Mrs. Quilt or something like that. Mrs. Quilter. In Langendene, okay, Langendendeirne and Crwbin district. So these are two places in Wales. She was, okay, so that's what she was called there. So in that whatever. Of another, the quilting woman would go round the farms making dowry quilts. And dowry quilts, apparently the words for that are spelled Cwiltiau, and then the second word is Stafell. So that CW, that is definitely quilt, or GWIL, that's definitely meaning quilt. I know that much. So going around the farms making dowry quilts, that certainly makes a lot of sense. I mean, you think here in the U.S., girls of certain types of families were making quilts throughout their youth with the intention of having that trousseau ready to go. But I could see, like, in really hard-working farm families, they might not have had time to do that. Not all of them spent their whole time on the road. Some were village quilters working in their own homes and visiting the farms occasionally. 50 years ago, one of these itinerant quilters was paid 9 pence a day, and another at about the same date had from 6 pence to a shilling, and another 1 shilling daily in food and a rest day on Sunday. Miss Annie Williams used to go about to farms, staying usually a week or so till a quilt was finished. At first, this must have been in the 1890s. She was paid 10 pence a day. 10 pence. That's different than tuppence. A tuppence is 2 pence, I think. So 10 pence a day. I started work at 8 in the morning, and no one would tell me when to stop. I had my lodging and food. They didn't think anything on the food then. In later years, she got as much as 3 shillings a day, and the same amount was mentioned by another quilter. This is the highest rate heard of. Mrs. Kate Davies, Cardiganshire, writes that quilters working at farmhouses were paid the same rate as dressmakers, from 1 to 3 to 1 and 6 a day with board. And Mrs. M.J. Davies of Pembrokeshire knew several quilters who traveled the farms and were paid 2 shillings and 6 pence a day for making the facings, presumably patchwork, and quilting them. So I guess, I feel like she's used this term facings a couple times, and I mean, that's got to be the top, right? Would be the part that's facing you. These refer to uncertain dates, probably in the first decade of this century. The custom of traveling the farms seems to have died out many years ago. I have spoken to a number of old quilters who did it in their youth, perhaps until they were married, but I have not heard of it being done in the last 20 years or so. Sometimes 2 or 3 quilters went together. Mrs. Evans of Lanrested, Cardiganshire, when she was apprenticed, used to go with her teacher to work on farms. They made a quilt from 5 to 7 days. Groups of 2 or 3 girls traveling the farms and working together on the frame had been heard of. Several quilters have told us how they took the opportunity to learn the craft from one of these itinerant quilters during her visit to their home. When a farmer's daughter was to be married, the quilter would be sent for in good time and might stay a month or more until 6 quilts were completed for the dowry. One gets the impression in talking to the old ladies who were itinerant quilters in their younger days that their life was a pleasant and interesting one. And by the way, 6 quilts for the dowry. Now here in the U.S. it was 12 quilts, with that 13th being the bride's quilt. And you think about it this way. You know, they always talk about how Americans do everything so big, you know, and like our food portions are bigger, and, you know, we as people are bigger and fatter than, you know, the Europeans. So I'm like, well, even with quilts, it was like, you don't just make 6 quilts for your dowry, you make 12 in America. Farm fare was good and ample, although they might sleep rough, and for a few weeks they became one of the busy farm community, and no doubt shared in the excitement of the wedding preparations when they were making an important part of the dowry. Okay, so now we move on to the third type of quilter, which are the quilt clubs. It seems likely that quilt clubs originated in the Welsh mining valleys and the pit villages of County Durham and Northumberland in the latter part of the 19th century. It happened only too often that a miner's wife found herself a widow. I mean, this is the truth. The mines were a dangerous place to work. Or with a disabled husband, and had to seek some means of supporting herself and her children. If she was skilled in the craft of quilting, she thought of her frame. There were her potential customers, hundreds of them, living close together all around her. She could make something gay and pretty for which there was always a need in every household. But how was she to find enough money to buy the 15 yards of sateen, half a dozen reels of cotton, and several pounds of wadding needed? Miners were earning low wages, and no customer would advance that money. Even when she had made her quilt, it might be long before any of her neighbors would find ready cash to pay for it. So she thought of the installment system and started her quilt club. Mrs. Hope said that her mother in 1887 was left a widow with 5 children and brought them up by quilting. When the 4 daughters were old enough, they helped her at the frame. 4 working together could turn out 4 quilts weekly. Once, by a terrific effort, they made a quilt in a day for a customer about to sail for America. Later, they ran their own clubs and all became well known locally as excellent quilters. A Northumberland woman said her mother, working with a neighbor, took a month or less to produce a club quilt. Mrs. Hicks and her mother completed one in a fortnight, but Mrs. Frizzle alone turned them out at the same rate. Mrs. J. Hitchcock, whose mother, a widow with 6 children, started her quilt club in about 1890, recalled that wages were paid fortnightly, and so the club contributions were similarly collected. But weekly collection seems to have been more usual. 2 shillings was the weekly installment in a Tweedmouth. That is spelled Tweedmouth. Tweedmouth. In a Tweedmouth club between the wars, but 1 shilling was more often mentioned, and sometimes 1 or 2 shillings a week. Mrs. Graham started her club when her widowed mother-in-law came to live with her. There were several children and only small wages coming in. They made a total of 200 quilts. The clubs became very popular. One quilter enrolled 40 members. Another boasted, I think it's my mother had the room of the place for quilts, but this is my mother had the room of the place for quilts. I can't do an accent. These instances are from Northumberland, where there were clubs in Amble, Bedlington, and Tweedmouth, and County Durham, where information was collected about some dozen clubs in the pit villages and at least 2 in Jarrow, one run by 2 maiden ladies in reduced circumstances. I guess that's a nice way of saying 2 maiden ladies who were in a rough situation. And the other by a woman with a ne'er-do-well husband and several children to bring up. There must have been many more in the period from 1887 until textile rationing put an end to them during the 1939 to 1945 war. In the South Wales coalfield in 1928, there were still a number of quilt clubs, but because of the terrible industrial depression at that time, they were less flourishing than they had been when most households had 1 or 2 men at work. The chapel quilt clubs were a great feature of the North, organized like a private club, but for the benefit of chapel funds. They often produced rag mats as well as quilts. The quilt frame, in fact, seems to have taken the place now held by the whist drive as a money raiser. The whist drive. I'm not sure what that is. Amble's, Northumberland, War Memorial, 1918, was provided by a tremendous communal quilt-making effort by every denomination. About 100 quilts were finally displayed in the village hall, and the fact that there were customers for so many shows the popularity of the work at that time. Several North Country women's institutes raised funds for themselves in their early days by raffling quilts, which were worked on by members cooperatively. This idea became so popular at one time that a group of Hexhamshire members decided to make one, even though none of them felt equal to designing it. They got a pattern drawn on paper from a Durham woman, the only instance of such a procedure that I have heard of, cut their own templates. It was set up in a member's house, and the middle section was worked first, which seems to have been considered very unusual in Northumberland, though it was sometimes done in Wales. 7 or 8 members worked on it, but not all at one time. Anyone who could spare an hour or 2 would come in and do a bit. It was a handsome piece of work and well done, but they did not make another. The Northumberland Federation recently had a cooperative quilt worked in their Newcastle office by members from all over the county, and this was raffled and brought in a large sum. Mrs. Grays Brown recalled how in her mother's home in the west of Northumberland, a frame was set up in the kitchen to raise money for the church in the early years of this century. Anyone from the village who could quilt came in and worked on it, the lady of the house supervising the pattern. It is difficult to give with accuracy the rates of payment in force at various dates because although many people remember clearly the sums their mother or grandmother earned, they cannot so definitely assign dates. There seems to have been a good deal of variation in payment from one district to another. A quilter's skill and local reputation might enable her to ask a higher fee, but this does not seem to have always been the case. Possibly a local scarcity of village quilters or some wave of prosperity among their customers raised the rate of payment. The only written evidence I have come across is a notebook kept by Mrs. Lace of Aberdare. Remember Mrs. Lace? We wonder, did she only make quilts and no lace at all? Mrs. Lace of Aberdare, when she began to make quilts for orders during a long coal strike in 1907 to help feed her 3 small children. She was paid 5 shillings for the first order and from 5 to 12 shillings for others, according to pattern. During the year, she earned 12 guineas by making 26 quilts, an average of about 8 shillings. This tallies pretty well with other people's statements about earnings. The information on rates of payment at various dates is tabulated in Index 1, which we'll look at that another time, in which an estimate of average weekly earnings is given. Village quilters working for a living may have spent long days at the frame, especially in summer, but those who had quilt clubs were generally the mothers of families, and their work must have been interrupted by necessary cooking and housework. The quilters' earnings seem to have been, on the whole, lower in Wales than in the North Country. For instance, Mrs. E.A. Williams, Carmarthenshire, said that her granny thought herself well paid, probably about 1900, with 5 shillings, and this was the rate mentioned by several others. But the only worker I heard of earning so little in the north was one in West Auckland, whom Mrs. Elizabeth Black used to watch as a girl, who made a club quilt weekly for 5 shillings, and very rough the work was, with only the simplest patterns, such as diamonds with twist border. And I bet it was far more fancy than some stuff you see today. Quilters were still working for very low wages, which are no longer due to the poverty of the customers, as was the case in the mining districts in the 20s. Comparatively expensive materials, costing several times the amount paid to the worker, are often chosen. Do we not hear about this today? Expensive materials, lots of time and energy, and then people want to pay you $50 for the quilt. These low rates are earned by workers who are not merely skilled needlewomen. They are also skilled designers, and every quilt must be separately planned and marked. To earn a living by quilting has always meant long hours of close application to the frame, and yet the old quilters who have lived by their craft do not often speak of it as drudgery. They were always able to enjoy the creative element in the work, to delight in a new pattern, to recall the triumph of achieving a particularly fine one. And that is what they chiefly remember. That was a very fun chapter. That was interesting. Never heard of itinerant quilters. I mean, you hear about, like, here in the U.S., you think about, like, during the Depression. And certainly, in the 19th century, but during the Depression, you hear about, men that kind of roamed and did, short-term stints on farms and stuff, just looking for work. But that was like a different thing than, these were people that, I guess I think of like, I guess these itinerant quilters, they were going to a place with a plan. They weren't just sort of roaming around looking for somebody to make a quilt for. So maybe they're more like the traveling, peddler, that came with things to buy. So chapter 3, which we will start on Thursday, is on the work of the Rural Industries Bureau, which we've heard her mention several times in the first 2 chapters. So the work of this bureau in reviving and developing the quilting industry. So very interesting stuff. Oh, sorry, Druid. I missed your comment. Spell it, those Welsh words. I'm just gonna call it my American language abilities. Yeah, I think about names, like Welsh names. I have a number of Welsh names in my family because I do have Welsh ancestry. So like Lloyd, Llewellyn. Those are some of the Welsh names in my family, because they start with the double L. So you've got the double L a lot. But yeah, beyond beyond that, like, and my gosh, when you've got a word that starts CW and like zero other, like no vowels, like what is that? Sorry, Welsh people. I know it's, Welsh is a of one of the Celtic. Well, really, I think all of the Celtic dialects are dying out. There's not many people that still speak those, and in fact, the English at one point would punish Welsh children for speaking Welsh. So, yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys. I hope you enjoyed the reading today. Not sure what we'll look at on Thursday, but yeah, be something interesting. So tomorrow, for Quilt Nerd, I'm sorry, for Quilt Nerding, Jill and I will not be here live, because God forbid I have a family thing to do. But we will have a video dropping at 2 p.m. tomorrow on Quilt Nerding. So if you want to watch it, if you do follow along with us, definitely watch it before the following Tuesday, because we're doing a part 1 in this pre-recorded, and then on the 23rd we will be talking about part 2 of that video. So watch the first one so you kind of get the lay of the land, what we're talking about. So, but otherwise, if you don't follow Quilt Nerding, then I will see you on Thursday. So hope you have a super week, guys. Couldn't do this without you. Wouldn't want to do it without you. So take care, guys. Thanks, Robin. Thanks, Sharon. Thanks, Marianne. So good to see all of you today. Mwah! Bye.